Good morning.
Morning.
Um, we're going to start in just a minute. Just waiting for more people to show up. All right. It's after Memorial Day weekend, so we'll see how people respond. All right, so meeting minutes in the link. I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. Hello, Bob.
Good morning.
Okay, forgive me, I do not recall seeing you in these meetings before. Do you want to introduce yourself? Or am I
Uh,
just
I've just been AWOL for a couple of weeks. I joined back in February and then have been traveling about, yeah, so
okay?
I'm from Shielded Technologies.
Okay, sounds good. So meeting minutes are open. You can put yourself on the attendee list right here, or I can do it for you. It's fine.
We've been going through a lot of work in announcing our company over the past 6 to 8 weeks. So that's been a huge distraction. So it's Shielded Technologies is the company.
Shielded Technologies.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So again, I'm hoping a couple of more people will join, so we have more of a forum. Uh, but what I did over the last couple of days is I created a pull request, and I and we can take a look at the commits. You can see what I've done, or I can just merge it. Hello, Brian. Um, but effectively, what I did more discussion on the provenance bit. I corrected a bunch of typos, just making sure the right terms are capitalized, or the defined terms are capitalized. Then I did a little bit of rearranging. Um, and um, Oh, there were some. Okay, Hank provided comments. I would like for him to be here then before I merge. Um, so one thing I wanted to like a note. Oh, wow, Matthias has also added things that we need to. Okay, sounds like we need to do a bunch of editing. Oh yeah, lots of comments. Okay, that's good. Comments are good. But just observing. Hi, Peter. Oh, it's a good time. Just have you over. All right, lots and lots of comments. Oh my God. Okay. Um, what I wanted to talk to you about today is the general structure of the draft. This is the before the pull request. So it sounds like I really want the participation of those who commented on the pull request to be here before I go on read. But there is a lot of duplication. So if you take a look, even though I reordered some of the sections later. So we talk about the three things that we're seeking to address. There is a lack of workload isolation, there is a lack of stroke binding, and then there is the inability to uh, have provenance figured, part of the decision. Okay, so those are the three things. But okay, so now we have some definitions. We have the workload identity is trustworthy, which is again speaking to the addressing the architectural shortcomings. That makes sense. And then, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong document. Oh my, it must be early. Never mind. What am I doing here? Okay. Um, these documents sort of have so much content in. Let's go back here. This is the document I'm addressing. All right. So the introduction is, this is what confused me. It's actually borrowed from the charter. We still have these three things that we're seeking to address. And then we have some definitions. Okay, so that's similar to the charter. I then add the definition in the pull request of trustworthy workload identity right after these ones. So we actually have a definition. And then the gap analysis, which does not talk about provenance, which is another gap in WIMSI, and I wanted to add that. And then we talk about, all right, that. Like what I talk about duplication, when we talk about use cases, we once again talk about isolation, binding, and provenance. Core requirements, we once again talk about the provenance. And I think it just gets repetitive and sort of tired and adds little to the message we're trying to convey for the informational draft. And alignment section is good, but we do want to explain that we're seeking to enhance the WIMSI architecture or adapt it, whatever we want to call that. And then we talk about sort of how would we extend it. Now we're talking about provenance again, but so with about, I would say, 3 weeks or so remaining. I guess what's the question I'm trying to pose here? Let's go back to the meeting minutes from last week. So what was discussed? I'm gonna put you guys on. All right. Okay, we talked about the problem analysis. Um, the we talked about, oh, that's another thing we wanted to discuss in the draft. We need to combine um, platform and verifier, sorry, platform and workload identity. Again, I talk about that in the pull request. That needs to make it into the draft. Yogesh and David were going to speak to provenance. Well, I, that's fine. Composability. So David was here last week and mentioned that he would like to make composability. So composability is just when you have workload made up of out of smaller pieces. What does that mean? So he felt it was important to include. So waiting for his wording on there. Um, okay, we talked about ambiguation, like lots and lots of things here. Credential procurement and acquisition. So I said I'm going to do it last week, but I was focused more on provenance this week. But I will add this wording. So and again, Peter, this is for your information because you haven't been here for a few weeks. But what we are observing is, and this is now referenced in the reference architecture, or starting to get mentioned, is there are three distinct phases in a credentials sort of lifetime, if you think about it, cradle to the grave. There is the initial provisioning of a credential, that what makes credential exist. Then there is an acquisition of a credential, which is a pre-provisioned credential. It gets acquired by the workload. And then finally, once the credential has been provisioned and acquired, and that can be used in authentication. And we're not talking about decommissioning here. That's sort of inherent. And we then talk about the fact that in some cases, the phases are combined. So in some cases, the workload, if it generates its own key and it procures its own credential, then the provisioning and the acquisition are one thing. However, if a credential is, or sorry, if a workload is very short-lived, in that case, the credential might get pre-provisioned, and then the workload, when it starts up, simply needs to acquire it, and it doesn't need to. Or another situation might be a credential as provisioned, so it consists of maybe a certificate and a key. And the workload, when it starts, or a test gets the key out of an HSM, and the public portion of the credential is just provided for it by what we call the workload owner, right? And that allows us to follow two models, or even like three distinct models. One is where credential is short-lived, or the workload is short-lived, the credential is simply locally cached, so very easy to pick up. This is the ceiling to the platform bit. Then there is one where the key is in the HSM, so it's shared between any number of workload instances. It's not unique to workload instance, but again, workload owner might provision it, but then authorized workload instances can get it, or the one where each workload instance gets its own very unique credential with its own very unique key, and then it gets that. So I guess the question I wanted to pose is, this is, of course, very important to the trustworthy workload identity and how it interacts with confidential computing. I do not know if it's necessarily something that Whimsy needs to worry about, because I think we would be compatible with Whimsy no matter which model is used. So I wanted to kind of hear folks who've worked either with Whimsy or with Spiral, Spiffy, what your feelings there are.
The first thing is just on terminology. What you describe as provisioning
Hmm.
is what I have mostly come across as being described as issuance.
Hmm.
And then what you describe, I forget the other word, but it's acquisition.
Yeah.
That is typically considered provisioning, right? So it's kind of like that's just terminology that is used in the identity world. Also, probably spiffy, I'd say, is a very common way of using it that way.
Hmm.
In terms of relevance to Whimsy, Whimsy has explicitly not addressed, is explicitly not addressing any of the issuance flows, really. Right. So mostly it's about um, runtime authentication has been the
Hmm.
main focus. And then there is, when it comes to provisioning, we kind of view that as out of scope in many ways, right? There is some documents that do describe some of the distribution mechanisms. So very common use is environment variables or file system as a
Yes.
mechanism for as a communications channel.
Yeah.
But by and large, Whimsy is not really concerned with the issuance aspect, right? We really sort of look towards the spiffy Spire world and say, well, that is a way in which you can get provisioned. There's also there's all sorts of other provisioning mechanisms that's available.
Right. So then I guess what I'm hearing is the informational draft that we put in front of Whimsy can omit those discussions because they are simply in the land of issuance, and so long as the resulting credential is quote unquote Whimsy compatible, that's what we ought to focus on.
I would You can have it for context, Mark. I wouldn't, it's always good to have the context, but as in terms of, I think, what people care about, and if you think about the charter of the Whimsy Working Group, it's focus on the runtime authentication side of things.
Hmm.
Mm,
So provenance is very much in scope for that because we want to say the runtime use of a credential may involve checking of provenance.
Provenance, I think, actually is really for rats. Whimsy don't care because provenance, I think, is either implied by the issuer.
Hmm.
Issuance is done based on the attestation that was done. And so I actually think if you want to talk about provenance, that's a RATS discussion
So
more than
you also not in the informational draft. Would that be your assessment?
I think anything that has to do with attestation mechanisms, you could have that there for informational purposes, but
Hmm.
if you brought that to a dispatch meeting or something like that, I would say that's like RATS is where the discussion about attestation and provenance and things like that should happen. It is the attestation
Um,
group after
that's
all.
no, that's perfectly fine. I guess the reason I keep bringing provenance is that it is not possible to do provenance in our world and not at least consider how it fits in the Whimsy architecture. And what I've been looking at, uh, sort of would have been considering, and I I don't know if it's just me or just like we talked about that, is we still need to carry that provenance breadcrumb initial sort of the root of provenance in the credential, and we actually hope that it is possible to do this uh, without disrupting a whimsy or even extending it by just designating a couple of things. So, for instance, in a Windows identity token, there is this JTI field, right? The JSON token identifier. And because that thing is unique, we could insert into the issuance mechanism of a credential, as you called it, or, the understanding that whoever issues the credential needs to basically then be able to map the identifier of a credential into some additional information that a requester may subsequently look at and say, tell me how this came about.
Interesting. Yeah. That's an interest. Okay. I mean, that'll make for an interesting discussion. I think it's no different from any other claim you might add. And so it's an interesting model to say the approach is to have a claim, JPI or otherwise, and that claim carries this additional meaning for any verifier, including, whatever this additional set of verifications might need to be.
The relying party, you mean? Verifier is a RATS term.
Sorry.
Verifier.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Term-
for us, this is the relying party or auditor, right? So, here's the two scenarios are the auditor wants to know that the credentials that are being received by relying party are properly vetted, right? And this is where you go. This is I'll, there is not, and and again, to bring you up to speed with the discussions we've had before. The there is nothing in my passport that's issued by U.S. government that says much about, where it came from, right? It simply says here's date of birth, date of expiry, here's a photograph, whatever number, but then there's the serial number, and the serial number presumably is unique for each passport that can be used by somebody to inquire with the passport office. What exactly, who exactly is this person, right? No, and why did you issue this particular passport? So the same kind of thing applies here. And I very much want to avoid adding new claims to Whimsy. I think that's just unnecessary friction that we can avoid would be good, where both X509 SVIDs, for instance, have those unique identifiers, and GTIs have those unique identifiers. So this is where I thought it would be worthwhile to bring that into the informational draft and basically say, like, well, we care about provenance, and this is what we use it for, so long as you make these already standard claims part of the credentials that are issued. We can take it over from there, and we'll separately, as you said, maybe in a separate working group, discuss how those are processed later.
That's a very interesting idea. Okay. I think there might be other discussions around that as well. Effectively, if I go back to the X509 world, I'm terribly blurred. Let me try this. If I go back to the X509 world, right, it sort of feels like the equivalent of the old policy OID, right? This is the thing that expresses the set of rules under which the credential was issued. I think it'll be very
Yes.
interesting to hear back from the working group in JWT land, which is what a WIT is, about what it'll be interesting just to get a sense. I can hear some folks proposing that maybe you just need to trust the issuer, right? I could also hear folks saying, well, maybe you do need a special claim. And I can also hear folks having a view on concerns about having structured values for a JTI claim. But
Yeah.
it's a string. It can be anything that the deployment wants to do.
Yeah.
And so, and again, right, I think I think that's a perfectly valid conversation to have in the working group. So it's
So
a very
let me speak to issuance policy OIDs. So there are they're not the same as provenance. And let me explain why. So an issuance policy OID basically says this credential has undergone a particular set of checks for this issuance policy. This issuance policy has been made in the issuance of this credential, right? And it's rich. It's never been completely standardized, but being an OID, it's effectively a string of numbers, and you can encode things in it, which I think there's never been like you can have an OID prefix, which effectively gives you a namespace, and then you can go party in that namespace. There is two problems with that. So the issuance policy OID, for one, doesn't translate cleanly into the JSON web token world, right? It's the nice thing about the JTI and the whatever it's with like unique ID. They're unique per credential. They're already there. So that's the breadcrumb you can always start with. The second problem with that is like for a Department of Defense may have, I don't know, clearance levels, which is some kind of an acyclic graph, right? And you can have a credential issued to you that basically says you are classified up to level X in that graph. And that is useful, right? You've satisfied the requirements for the particular clearance level. What it doesn't do, it doesn't answer why, right? Provenance is really about why. It's something that, and because they're not unique, if I have two workloads and they're both classified for level 3, I cannot go from that and say, well, actually, let's go back and tell me what your bills of materials were so I can check you for vulnerabilities, right? And the poster child for us, like as a financial institution, why we care about provenance is when credentials come in, we might want to do special additional checks for high risk, high value transactions, right? So like we are in the risk management business, we can afford to lose, pick a number, $100 million a day out of several trillions we transact, like something like that, right? Now, that means that if a transaction exceeds a threshold, again, pick a number, $50 million, right? That is when your relying party may say, you know what, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to go check and see if this, some additional checks I can apply to this particular authorization dance, right? And there is no additional check you can do in an issuance policy OID, unless that issuance policy OID itself encodes some additional like endpoint, something unique about that credential. But they're inherently not unique versus provenance IDs as I'm advocating for are.
Let me try and say this differently, and maybe this helps. I think maybe I should sort of reflect back so that I'm maybe let's see if I heard you right instead of the other way to do this. I think what I'm hearing you say is that the policy OID doesn't give you sufficient granularity. And you would actually want to know about that specific credential and some more details about the environment, the oh, sorry, the word escapes me, claims, the assurances around that. And you don't want it to be sort of as broad as, oh, it was issued in this bucket of things. You
Correct.
want to dereference it and be very specific.
Yeah.
And in the X509 world, of course, you can use the serial number and potentially do a lookup. There might be a million ways. And you want a similar kind of mechanism for the JWTs, basically.
As I would like to reuse as much as possible. That's sort of my instinct.
That's a great instinct. Okay, now that makes sense. Thanks, Mark. I apologize. I do have to drop for a few minutes. I might be able to join again in 15 or so, but thanks for that explanation. I think that'll make for a very interesting discussion. So yeah.
So, okay, so provenance discussion, as I hear you say, we put the informational draft because we want to basically uh, start a discussion around uh, how do we think about the relying party doing deeper checks on the issued credential and following back to the issuer with additional questions, if any.
Right, and those kinds of additional questions, I think for the, let's call it the common case, is often just you trust the issuer and that is enough. And I think what you're saying is you have special use cases where that is not sufficient.
Correct. Correct.
This is thanks, Mark. I have to drop for
Okay.
another call, but I'll rejoin if I can.
All right. Sounds good. We'll talk to you soon. Manu, now that I've seen you appear, I believe you had things to say about the pull request that I put in.
Hi, sorry I was late. Not specifically, and I haven't really looked at the work
Oh,
over the
okay.
past few days. I did submit something to David quickly after our previous meeting on the
Mhm.
composability thing. So I don't know if your question is related to that, but I have not.
No, it's not.
Okay.
It just I was going through early in the meeting. So last night, or yeah, yesterday sometime, I put in a pull request, basically suggesting a number of changes to the informational draft, and I just woke up this morning to an entire number of comments from Mateusz, from Hank. I thought I saw you on this list, but I guess I did not. Sorry,
You
I
did not.
apologize.
You did not.
Okay. Can you fill us up on the discussions you've had with David on composability? So I want to keep track of what the informational draft is going to say about that.
Yeah, it was not a discussion. I basically did a brain dump or put bullet points
Hmm.
of the things that I'm thinking about, and it's to some extent, interestingly enough, is always connected to also the provenance piece, right? Is essentially being able to compose to have verifiability of a composite workload or metadata that goes into that workload. So I wrote some bullet points, send them to David. I actually dropped the bullet points in ChatGPT to see what he would say about it and see
Yeah.
if it could write some text. I put all that in an email very quickly after last meeting. If you want, I can forward that to you too. But I have, as I said, I have not looked. I don't know if he actually put anything into the repo, but I can look into that. Sorry, I
Yeah.
don't have more
Do
updated.
you want to share your bullet points with us today so we can at least
Sure.
start thinking about where your mind is at?
Sure, absolutely. I can put them in the minutes if you want. Is that okay? Or put a link to the document in the
Or
minute.
you can share your screen and we can take a look at it now. It's whatever works best for you.
Sure. Let me see. Send. I need to find. It's with it quickly. There we go. Trustworthy composability. I'm going to put this over here. All right, let me share that window then. I cannot start sharing
Oh, I
while.
need to stop sharing. I apologize. Okay, let
No
me do that.
worries.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, shoot, I cannot. It's too small. I cannot see what am I going to be sharing here. Oh, there we go. All right, I hope I'm sharing the right thing. Do you see the email?
Yes.
Okay, so I can read them. Maybe it's too small. So,
Well, I can see it. I don't know about others.
okay. Confidential computing, orders of magnitude stronger security, the ultimate relying parties, consumers. So the not just JP Morgan, but people who are relying on composite computing services, including it can be a relying party like JP Morgan, having to rely on a SaaS workload, but it's also the end users for us. Need to be able to have a assurance about the composite workloads as a whole. Trustworthiness for end users means authenticity, confidentiality, and privacy, in particular, properties that are specifically well delivered by confidential computing, and then can be damaged by a single non-CC link. The eventual state, so the reason why we care about composability is that in the end, what we want is, I'm not saying, and again, right, I agree with you that we need to go from the world today into, and step by step be able to get to where we want to go. And so we need a migration path, but eventually we want a world where essentially all workloads can run in confidential computing machines and can be trustworthy, which means that the mechanism by which we create those compositions needs it to be itself, trustworthy and verifiable, which may create requirements, for how we actually determine identities for these workloads. Therefore, Whimsy starts with non-TWI world, in which composability is not particularly critical. And you heard, what's his name? He just left.
Peter?
Anyway, Peter, that's right. You heard Peter say that, it's good enough to trust the issuer in the standard case for Whimsy. That's what I've heard over and over again every meeting, ATF meeting I went to. The issue is that indeed this approach prevents you from incorporating the requirements for trustworthy composability from the start. And that then would end up with a standard that inherently weakens the security of an eventual, trustworthy composite workloads. And eventually, in our case, we want the whole network to be trustworthy. So that's what I fed back to David. And we can, water this down or modify it. But, I
So
wanted to give our
let me
perspective.
ask you sort of a blunt question on that. So
Yes.
by the way, I'm a deep believer in figuring out composability as certainly in the framework of attestation, right? So when I attest a workload and part of the workload runs on CPU, part on GPU, part on Smart NIC, it needs to be a holistic assessment of everything that went into it. So I believe in
Yeah.
that. That's
Yeah.
one form of composability. Another form of composability is that at some point in time, no application today is just one device, or much like it's not one microchip. It's spread across queuing services and databases and buses and compute units and serverless units, and there's this, right? So any application today is this complex beast. So it has, in my mind, some sort of a composite identity in that, it's, I am Mark, but I'm also made up of connective tissue and eyeballs and other
That's
stuff.
right.
Right. Okay. Which, right. Okay.
It's funny. I just finished my presentation for the Confidential Computing Summit, and I'm talking exactly about that. The nervous system and all the parts that need to come together to actually make a trustworthy mark, right? And
Yeah.
the integrity of mark. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. So that said, for purposes of Whimsy, so that's my blunt question to you. Isn't that covered effectively entirely by provenance?
I don't think so, because provenance, and we've actually you've said a few times that, we have CAs, we have certificate authorities, so it's good enough to just have a credential that's signed by a CA that people can rely on. In fact, those mechanisms basically only move the target, right? You get a very strong evidence from a chip, from the attester environment, the TE, and then you basically say, well, it's good enough that I'm going to use a squishier certificate authority to then sign this thing that I just got signed from a piece of hardware. I think the provenance approach, if it was provenance from our perspective, and the system architecture that we have, yes, then it's correct, because the provenance is actually assured by the verifier, because the verifier is itself the identity server, if you want, for the workload in our architecture. So all that is united. But if you say broadly that provenance, regardless of how provenance is implemented, answers this, I don't think it does. The requirement here is the trustworthiness of how those things come together, how the metadata, the reference values, the context, which is all the provenance thing, but how is that coming together, and what is the verifiability of that thing?
So you were a little late to the meeting, if I remember. So I think you missed
I apologize
something.
for that.
You missed something that Peter said before he disconnected. Okay. So I'm going to be the connective tissue between the two strands of conversation. So the thing that he said, which got me thinking, is that Whimsy, which is the target audience for this document, is really about the format and use of the credential. It is not about issuance of the credential. So issuance of the credential is apparently, according to Peter, something that Whimsy is sidestepping and could have a, its day in the sun in the, attestation working group, or maybe there's another working group that deals with identity providers and how they issue credentials, right? So Whimsy is really about what goes into the credential and how does the relying party deal with it. So in that context, provenance, because it's expressed in the credential, has room in Whimsy, because we don't have to say about anything much about, like, except for context, how it comes about. Like Whimsy is, we'll say, look, there is this piece of information, ideally, repurposing an existing claim, but whatever, that the relying party can use to, make additional checks. And this is part of Whimsy bread and butter. Whereas, what machinations went into the composition of that credential and how it came to be is really not. So this is where I'm starting to think now, if I take Peter's statement as correct, then we take the work that you and David are doing on composability, we put it into the TWI reference architecture. We then take it to the attestation SIG and belabor it there, right? But again, the document—
You mean the CCC attestation SIG?
CCC attestation SIG, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but that's not a standardization body, right? That's the thing.
Right. And then maybe when we meet at the IETF, we can then talk to Whimsy people and say, look, we're presenting you the idea that provenance is of importance to the relying party. And that's where we also had this discussion, is issuance policy oid enough as provenance or whatever, right? So
Right.
we already talked. So, and then we can say, all right, so where else in the IETF do we go with this? Like RATS, for instance, maybe, the next version of RATS RFC, which is IETF and is standards body of sorts. Now, we could start talking about it there.
Right.
Right. So again, this work is not wasted. I'm just saying the proper channel for it may not be the Whimsy working group.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I was not surprised when I heard Peter push back. The one lesson that I've learned from my attending the IETF several past meetings is that indeed the work is always scoped very, very narrowly, and it's very difficult to actually find people who are trying to think about system design as a whole. And because it's all about, and I applaud and I agree and I understand what you're trying to do by leveraging what already exists, right, as much as possible and try not to disrupt it. The reality is that confidential computing brings in a completely new toolkit or toolbox that really enables us to rethink system design level, considerations. And I have been unable to find a place within even the RATS team and there's a couple of other CCC related or confidential computing related groups. It's so narrow the way that they define things that it's difficult to have conversations that are broader from the strict documents that they're working on.
Yeah.
So anyway, I put this on paper because I knew that I didn't have time to work on the documents. If you don't want to include it, that's fine with me. I'm not upset in any way. I know it's not wasted. But yeah, so that's where it is.
Well, no, not only is it not wasted, it's actually very much necessary. It's like we need to get this down on paper, and right. So looking at my calendar, I believe the attestation SIG is not meeting today. It's meeting next week. So let's get the work that you and David are doing in a presentable format before then, and message the attestation SIG and say we would like to present.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that next week, but because I think the attestation SIG is on Wednesdays, right?
It's on Tuesdays
Oh,
at
it's on
9
Tuesdays.
Pacific. So it starts 3 hours after this meeting.
Yeah, so that's why it collides. I used to have it, and I
Well,
used to come.
maybe David then can present. It doesn't require both of you. I'm saying the document needs
yeah.
to be, or I can speak to it even. That doesn't matter. Like I'm in those meetings.
Right.
But I'm just saying this. Let's follow the proper channel for that. And what I'm getting out of this discussion today is the proper level of targeting for the Whimsy informational draft specifically, which in a sense is good, because if we understand the exact scope, and I'm happy to do less work and cover fewer topics here, so we can proceed with the with the business of this working group and advancing sort of the confidential computing aspects of it. It's just eventually it needs to be expressed. My belief is in a Whimsy token, or a related type of thing, like Spiral, like Spiffy ID, right? So, but there is more to workload identity, trustworthy workload identity, than what Whimsy deals with. So that's what I'm getting out of this. We'll just scope one narrower, spend perhaps less time on it, get the information draft out the door, get discussed, whatever. And here we'll proceed with the the remaining big discussions,
Sounds
including how the relying party might deal with provenance.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I have nothing else that I can discuss today. I'm happy to cut the meeting short and continue working on the draft offline. The pull request is out there. Feel free to review and comment. I just wanted to poll the room. Ariel, Brian, do you have anything to add right now? Ariel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add right now. I'm just wondering, is there a sort of good way to just sort of start a comment thread about some particular part of the document? I mean, I could create a new issue or pull request or something, but I mean, not necessarily related to a pull request, just call out a part of it and
Specifically on the Whimsy draft, right?
Yeah, on the
Informational draft. Okay. I would say the best. I don't want to use GitHub to review long documents and edit them. I would rather do Google Docs going forward. But whatever. That aside,
I agree.
There's just GitHub is just not good user experience. But okay, I would say put all your comments in a unless there are comments specifically on my pull request, which those comments should go into the pull request. But if you have thoughts, file an issue. And we will discuss this issue as a set of comments, and then a pull request will result out of addressing that issue, and then we'll merge that.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Right. And also I would say, so normally what happens is, because this meeting is on Tuesdays, I work on it Saturday through Monday. So if whatever content you can get during the week, by the weekend, that is the best fertilizer for the continuing growth.
Okay.
All right. So with that, I guess we're going to wrap up, and I will see you guys next week. Please, again, take another look at the pull request, the number 12 in GitHub. Provide your comments. We'll work through those comments in the next few days and get them committed. Again, we only have 2.5, 3 weeks to get the draft out the door.
And Mark, you said you're going to be in person at the IETF meeting?
At the I'm going to Madrid, yes.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to the CCC. because I don't want to pay California income tax for the
You
days
mean the
I'm there.
CCS?
The summit. I'm not going there.
So you're not based in
I'm in Seattle.
I see. Got it.
And
Okay.
the California tax system is such that it says if I set foot in California, I get charged hundreds of dollars a day. So screw 'em.
Wow.
I'll connect over Zoom. I'll go to Madrid.
Interesting. All right. Well, you have to be careful because Spain also has some interesting, wealth tax and stuff like that. Just kidding.
Yeah, well, I'm not moving there. I'm just
Yeah. If you
like,
spend 6 months of the year, then you have to be
yeah.
careful. But yeah.
No, I got a special dispensation from my manager to work from Madrid for a week, but I'm only attending ATF for a day, but I will be there.
Wonderful. Cool.
All right,
See you
take
there.
care. Okay,
Take
bye.
care. Bye-bye. Thanks.